Palestine, 1947. Nobody remembers it starting with a letter, but it did. On the 2nd of November, 1917, Arthur James Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary, wrote a letter to Walter Rothschild, a leader of the British Jewish community. The letter's key sentence was 67 words long. It stated that the British government viewed, with favor, the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. 67 words, written by one man, on behalf of an empire, about land that empire did not yet rule, land where hundreds of thousands of Arabs were already living. To understand why Balfour wrote it, you have to understand what Britain needed in 1917. The war against Germany was going badly. France was exhausted. Russia was collapsing. Britain desperately needed the United States fully in the war, and British officials were looking for any advantage they could find. Some of them believed that publicly backing a Jewish homeland would build sympathy for the war effort in America and beyond. There was a calculation, a transaction. The Balfour Declaration was, at least in part, a wartime diplomatic move, promising something that was not Britain's to give. And Britain had already made another kind of promise, to Arab leaders who had risen against the Ottoman Empire alongside the British. Wartime letters between 1915 and 1916 had implied that Arab independence across the region would be supported after the war. Whether those promises included Palestine is disputed by historians to this day. But what is not disputed is this: Britain had made overlapping, conflicting commitments to two different peoples, and then it had to govern the contradiction. Through the 1920s and 1930s, under the British Mandate in Palestine, Jewish immigration increased, including many fleeing rising anti-Semitic persecution in Europe. The Zionist movement, founded by Theodor Herzl in 1897, had argued for decades that Jewish people would never be safe in Europe. They needed a state of their own. They were right. What came next proved it beyond any possible doubt. Between 1941 and 1945, 6 million Jewish people were murdered by Nazi Germany. Entire communities, centuries old, were erased. The Holocaust was not a pogrom and not a persecution. It was an industrial program of extermination. And when it ended, and the camps were opened, and the world saw what had happened, it changed everything. By 1945, there were 250,000 Jewish survivors living in displaced persons camps across Europe. They had no homes to return to. Their families were gone. Their towns were gone. Many who tried to go back were killed by their neighbors. In Poland, returning survivors were attacked in pogroms even after liberation. They had nowhere to go. And so the pressure on Palestine, already intense, became overwhelming. Britain, caught between its promises and the impossible reality it had created, tried to limit Jewish immigration to Palestine. Jewish paramilitary groups fought back. The Irgun, led by a man named Menachem Begin, bombed the British military headquarters at the King David Hotel in Jerusalem in 1946, killing 91 people. The Stern Gang carried out assassinations. The British found themselves fighting an insurgency in a territory they could no longer control. Menachem Begin, it should be noted, later became the 6th Prime Minister of Israel and shared the Nobel Peace Prize. Exhausted and politically humiliated, Britain handed the problem to the newly created United Nations. In November 1947, the UN General Assembly passed Resolution 181, the Partition Plan. It proposed dividing Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state, with Jerusalem under international administration. The Jewish leadership accepted it, the Arab states rejected it, and on the 14th of May, 1948, with British forces withdrawing, David Ben-Gurion stood in Tel Aviv and declared the establishment of the State of Israel. 11 minutes later, the United States recognized the new state. 11 minutes. President Truman had been under enormous pressure from multiple directions. His Secretary of State, George Marshall, the most respected man in Washington, the architect of the post-war order, told Truman to his face that recognition was premature, dangerous, and driven by domestic politics. Marshall said that if Truman recognized Israel, he would vote against him in the next election. That was the weight of the disagreement. Truman recognized Israel anyway, 11 minutes after the declaration. What happened next has two names, depending on who is telling the story. For Israelis, it is the War of Independence, a surrounded, newly born state fighting for its survival against 5 invading armies. That story is true. For Palestinians, it is the Nakba, the catastrophe. And that story is also true. Israeli historians, including historians publishing in Israeli universities, have documented what happened. From late 1947 and through 1948, Jewish military forces cleared Arab villages from territory designated for the Jewish state, and from strategic areas beyond it. The military framework had a name: Plan Dalet. Whether it was a deliberate blueprint for expulsion or a wartime clearing of hostile positions is exactly what serious historians still debate. Over 400 Palestinian localities were depopulated. Estimates vary by source. Some were abandoned as residents fled in fear. Some were taken by force. Some were destroyed. The debate among serious historians is not about whether it happened. The documentation is extensive, but about intent, about the degree of central planning, about individual commanders' orders. What is not in dispute: roughly 700,000 Palestinian Arabs left their homes in 1948, and most were never allowed to return. Many of them locked their front doors before they left. They took their keys. They told their children they would be back in a week, maybe 2. The Arab armies would push the Jewish forces back. The situation would stabilize, and they would go home. That week never ended. In the refugee camps, the keys were passed down, from parent to child, from child to grandchild. Families who had never seen Palestine, born in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Gaza, kept the keys to houses that no longer existed. The symbol became so widespread, it has a name: the key of return. Today, more than 75 years later, the descendants of those 700,000 people number in the millions. They are still waiting. This was the story of the creation of Israel and of those still waiting to return.